and we are back yet again. And I am so, as you can tell, I am so ridiculously excited to be back for another comic book wrap-up. I know it feels like it's been so long, and as you can see, things are just a little different. I'm not gonna lie, I've actually recorded this video about 3 times now, and each and every time I just get more and more frustrated with it. I wasn't completely happy with the quality. However, I finally worked through all of the kinks, and we are back, and we are finally gonna do this. Now, if you noticed on my channel, I didn't exactly post a June wrap-up video, and that's mainly due to the fact that I really didn't read that many comics in June, and the things that I did read in June were basically rereads and things that I had talked on the channel previously, aside from a few good ones here and there. Hence why we're going to be doing a June-July mega wrap-up. So with that being said, I just want to real quick, just touch on the idea of burnout, especially comic burnout and reading burnout, because that's exactly what I went through during the month of June. I found myself pushing myself to the limits and to the extreme, and I think it's very important that we as fans and readers and this community acknowledge that burnout is a very real thing. So please do not stress yourself. If you find yourself reading less than you normally do, or even if you're not reading anything at all, it is okay. And that love, that passion, and that drive to read will only come back with time. Now, as you can see, there are quite a lot of reads here, not only because we're doing, a double mega month reader event thing going on here, but because our libraries have opened back up. With COVID and everything being shut down, our library shut down. That made me really sad. It also made me force myself to, read through all of the wonderful things that are already on my shelf. But now that the libraries are back, I am now reading double of what I've been, and I'm really excited to get into this with you guys today. So without further ado, here is everything that I read in June and July. So I kind of feel like I'm going through this theme where I'm finally reading books that have been sitting on my shelves for literal years and finally taking a chance on them or revisiting them or whatever. I don't know. Corona is kind of making me, like I said, force myself to read all of the wonderful books that I already have, especially when we had that library shut down. So I finally, listen, I'm really excited about this one. So I finally was able to read through Bitch Planet. And Bitch Planet, I have literally had this book on my shelf since the trade released. And that was like 4 years ago. And for some reason, Bitch Planet was just a book that I had kept picking up over and over and over again. And for some reason, I couldn't get through that first issue. I struggled through it. I slogged through it because I'm not gonna lie, this book can be a little dense, but I am proud to say that I finally got through Bitch Planet Volume 1, and not only did I get through Bitch Planet Volume 1, I read Bitch Planet Volume 2 too, so little cheers to myself on that one. So Bitch Planet is just a really awesome forward-thinking book. It follows a group of non-compliant women in a space prison, and when I say non-complacency, I mean if you're too skinny, if you're too fat, if you're too loud, if you're too quiet, if you're too queer, if you're too whatever, if you are not the perfect ideal white woman, we'll even go that far to say if you're not the perfect ideal white woman, then Bitch Planet is where you go and Bitch Planet is where you stay. So in other words, I am a non-compliant woman and Bitch Planet, here I come. But I really like Bitch Planet, and I feel like the reason why I was able to finally sit down and read Bitch Planet is because of all of the political things that are going on right now, things with the Black Lives Matter movement, things with the current 2020 election, and just everything that we're fighting for kind of carries through in this book. I think the creative team here have done a really wonderful job in giving us a colorful cast and unique, diverse cast of characters. I mean, we're seeing women here of all colors, all genders, all sizes. We even see some fat babes, which your girl really appreciates because I'm kind of a fat, curvy babe myself. So I really like seeing myself represented in the comic books in which I read. But Bitch Planet is just one of those books. It's a very heavy book, so it's definitely not going to be for everybody, but I think it's definitely a book that you should at least give a try, especially given the political and climate circumstances that are going on right now in the world. I think it's a really great companion piece to SFSX, another book that I've recently talked about and I love a whole lot. But Bitch Planet just has some really really amazing quirks about it that I absolutely just love. So there's these really awesome vintage ads at the end of every issue, and they're like these old 1950s, 1960s pulp ads, and they all relate to ridiculous and really out there products that kind of encourage a complacent woman. So in other words, they're products that you're gonna hate, but I did get a really big laugh out of them just because of the satire that each one holds behind it and each ad that there is. I also really like the fact that Bitch Planet at the end of the book, at least at the end of book 1, has a really great discussion guide, which works wonderful if you're like me and you host a book club for comics. So Bitch Planet, I'm gonna need you to read it because I'm gonna need to talk about it, and I'm really excited because I actually have the Bitch Planet triple feature on my TBR list, so I'm really excited to get into that. So I think that we've kind of established the fact that it's not really a That Comic Girl comic wrap-up video if I don't feature some sort of Vault Comics title somewhere on that list. And while I love Vault Comics with every inch of my heart, not all Vault Comics, mind you, as we learned last month with the plot and how I felt about that. But I feel like These Savage Shores is quite possibly the best book that they've ever published, let alone one of the best books of all of 2019. I'm not kidding when I say that if there is one book from Vault Comics I need you to read, it's gonna be These Savage Shores, because it literally is just top tier when it comes to its storytelling, when it comes to its content, and it's a really good book. Would I lie to you? Would I lie to you about how good a book is? I think not. So These Savage Shores really goes back into those gothic horror roots, and that is something that I am extremely passionate about. You know, your girl, I don't really do a whole lot of horror. I don't do some of the ghosties and the body horror and things like that, but where my heart really belongs in terms of horror, it's in gothic horror. It is in monsters. It is in vampires. It is in that sweet gothic romance and, you know, the beautiful women in big dresses facing utter trauma and turmoil and then turning into these monsters. Did I just summarize the entire plot of Insects? I think I just did. But These Savage Shores is really unique and really different from anything we've seen. So it follows the story of this group of vampires, and there's one vampire in particular who actually gets caught while living in England. He gets caught and found out that he's a vampire because he's feasting on some girl willy-nilly. Boy, what have you done? But he gets caught, and so the rest of the vampires, to protect him, kind of exile him to a small colony over in India. And this vampire Duke, King, Lord, Dude, whatever we want to call him, he thinks that he's showing up in kind of like a third world country. He thinks he's showing up in a place that's lesser than him. And so he thinks that, you know, not only because he is probably a white man, but also because he is a vampire and he's got all these vampire powers, he thinks he's basically going to be able to run the show. However, you thought wrong, because These Savage Shores already has a hidden secret, and that is of this country's hidden monsters and these fabled beasts. And our vampire friend here runs into one in particular, and let's just say that it's not a good time for him. However, one of the things I really also love about These Savage Shores is not only is it that gothic horror, but it has that injection of romance that I really love, and it's something that I desperately want to see more of in comics. So I'm getting my gothic horror romance, and it's literally just, it's a chef kiss of a book. It's a wonderful book. Ram V has done just wonderful in terms of his storytelling. And if you like monsters, if you like a little bit of gothic horror, if you like commentary on colonization and the way that all went, this is literally a perfect book for you. So These Savage Shores, like I said, if there's one Vault Comics title, it's got to be this one. These Savage Shores, man. And this is just a really great book too, because it is literally just this and you're done. It's a 5-issue series. It's self-contained. It's a book that you can read in one sitting. So there's no excuse for you right now, is there? No, I thought not. So I talked about it a little bit in my giant graphic novel haul video that I did many moons ago, even though it wasn't actually that long, but it feels that long. But I talked about how I'd never really read anything from Matt Kindt. However, that being said, it kind of feels like the books that he writes kind of are very similar in terms of style to that of Jeff Lemire, and that's how I feel a lot about this next book. So Grass Kings is a Matt Kindt story. However, if you had handed me this book and you didn't tell me who it was by and I didn't get to see the cover and you just had me read it, I honestly would think that this was a Jeff Lemire story, because like Jeff Lemire, Matt Kindt kind of takes these realistic ideas that are kind of, outreaching in just the smallest forms and yet somehow makes them wholly relatable. And that's exactly what happened with Grass Kings. So Grass Kings is like a little strange story about a small town that has kind of pulled itself away from everywhere else. They've completely gone off the grid, and they neighbor another small town who doesn't quite always agree with them, including their sheriff, and that kind of makes things escalate when the wife of the sheriff of the neighboring town shows up on the shores of our little grass kingdom. And it's like really interesting to see how this town has kind of evolved while taking itself completely off the grid. It's kind of like this little trailer park kingdom, if you will. What's really odd to me about Grass Kings is how slow of a burn it actually is. So I say that it's a slow burn, however, I was still able to read it in one sitting, which kind of amazes me, because when I think about it, it's not a book that should be as interesting as it probably is. With that being said, there's also not really that much action. You really don't get to see any action from Grass Kings up until its finale, when these two towns sort of go at each other in a last stand final, battle between our Grass Kingdom and the neighboring town with the sheriff that just hates them with every fiber of their being. Grass Kings has, I believe it has 4 trades right now, which is another really interesting concept to me, because the way that Grass Kings end, it feels like it's a complete story. It feels like it could end then and there. But yet with 4 trades altogether, there's still more to be told. So I feel like this story is going to go kind of one of 2 ways. Either we're going to be able to see a full, complete story. We're going to get to see some of the backstories of these characters flushed out. Or it's going to kind of run its course and overstay its welcome. And I'm really, really hoping that it's that first one rather than the latter. Now, I don't believe in doing my whole, this is my pick of the month and this is my favorite book that I read. But yet, that being said, every single video that I've done, I've kind of had a pick book of the month. And I'm definitely going to say that this book coming up, this is definitely my pick of the month if I have to pick a singular book. Crowded is so unbelievably good. I can't begin to explain how great this book is, and it makes me even angrier that I had the first issue. I never read the first issue. I finally got the trade. I fell in love with the trade, and now after the second trade, they actually are not doing singular issues for Crowded anymore, and it's just going to be a trade format, which I kind of agree with. And I feel like a lot of comics, especially when you look at indie comics that are more outreaching to the mainstream audience and the more casual reader, I do think that single issues are going to kind of go away at some point, and we're just going to go with standalone trade formats. But that's a conversation for another day, of course. So Crowded, I'm trying to explain what Crowded is, because it is just so bizarre and strange and otherworldly, while at the same time taking place in a near distant future. So as I said, it takes place in a near distant future. Crowdfunding assassinations are now a thing. No, I did not stutter. You heard me correctly. Crowdfunding assassinations is a real thing in the world of Crowded. So when our main character Charlie gets what is possibly the biggest bounty that has ever been seen in crowdfunding assassins, and when I say crowdfunding, I mean they have full-blown TV shows and full-blown like action figures for these assassins, and this book, man, it's just bizarre, but it's a lot of fun. When Charlie gets the largest bounty of her life, she ends up teaming up with Vita to protect her, and oh my god, I love these characters so much. I love the art style of this book so much. I love the dialogue of this book so much. It feels really modern, and it's really witty, and it plays a lot of off of pop culture and things that are going on right now. So it's definitely a very modern book that not everybody's going to agree with, but hey man, that's comics. And did I mention it's really, really gay? And I live for Vita and Charlie, which are two characters that are complete opposites of each other. You have Charlie, who's this pink-haired, bubbly, I can do no wrong, kind of annoying little attitude. And then you have Vita, who's just this badass, cool, toughest chick, nails, babe with kind of maybe a tragic backstory. We haven't really seen too much, but she's definitely a loner type. And when these two come together, man, it's my favorite kind of book. It's a slow burn, but it's just, I really, really love Crowded. I know I talked about this in my graphic novel haul video. However, did you think that I was going to go a second without talking about Crowded and the best character that has possibly come of comics ever since Jeff the Land Shark? Dog is just the most beautiful creature that I have ever met in comics ever, and I literally would protect him with every fiber of my being, and thinking about him right now just brings me to tears. Listen, y'all thought Jeff the Land Shark was cute. Y'all thought Baby Yoda was cute. Listen, it's all about Dog, okay? I love Dog. But Crowded is just such a beautiful experience. It literally is one of those books where it's like I immediately needed to get volume 2, and now I have to painfully wait for volume 3. It's a lot of fun. The art style is really gorgeous. It's extremely colorful, and if you're just looking for a fun casual read, I definitely recommend checking this one out. It's a lot of fun, and it's probably the most fun I've had with a comic in a long time. The next book on my list belongs to PTSD. This is a book by First Second Comics, and I really love First Second as a publisher, and I feel like I don't talk about them enough. I definitely at one point want to do a whole publisher spotlight on them because they really do have hard hitter books out there like Bloom and The Prince and the Dressmaker, and Laura Dean is Breaking Up With Me, and PTSD honestly goes up there in terms of the ranks of books that they've been publishing. Now, PTSD, I will say the one downside with this book is it has a heavy price point. It has about a $25 price point on it, and that is mostly due in part to the fact that it is a hardcover book with a gorgeous die-cut cover. PTSD is a very, very heavy book, and I will warn you about that ahead of time. It's a very heavy book that hides under the guise of a whimsical art style and direction, very similar to Hayao Miyazaki and Studio Ghibli movies. It's extremely gorgeous. The backgrounds in it are extremely detailed, and you find yourself looking in every ounce and crevice to see exactly what kind of details the artist and writer has hidden in there for you. But PTSD follows the story of a soldier named June who comes back after a war that isn't exactly favorable. So she doesn't come back as this hero. Instead, she's kind of seen as this villain, and she finds herself on the streets of this, large city, kind of like Tokyo style city. And she finds herself struggling because she's struggling with her PTSD. She's struggling with the fact that she failed her team back in the war. She's also dealing with a struggling drug addiction. And it's a whole book about her finding herself, and not only just finding herself, but it's also just a book about her accepting and acknowledging that sometimes even as this tough, rough soldier, that she also needs help, that she's not just there to help others, but that she needs to accept that others are there to help her as well. She finds herself encountering several people, including a mom and her young child. She also finds herself encountering a dog that kind of helps push her along even in her darkest moments. PTSD, where it really shines, is just in its character development. It's a really wholesome book. However, like I said, it is also a very heavy book. So please, if you do find yourself reading PTSD, I definitely encourage taking breaks, because it can really wear and tear on your mind. At the end of the day, yes, while I think that comics are supposed to, and I encourage comics in telling these very heavy stories, I also acknowledge the fact that we as readers also need to take care of ourselves and need to acknowledge that sometimes it's okay to close the page and return to it. I'll be honest when I say I'm not a humongous fan of Ed Brubaker. Ed Brubaker is known with Image Comics for putting out these really awesome, single graphic novels. They're usually crime-filled stories, and like I said, that's not my thing. I honestly, if I'm being honest with you, I didn't really enjoy his Catwoman, but not every writer's gonna be for everybody, and that's okay. However, Bad Weekend was a book that I learned about thanks to Liam and the Nerdburger Kaz, which are two of my favorite people on the earth, and you should definitely check out their YouTube channel. However, Liam was talking about how Bad Weekend is an Ed Brubaker crime story. However, it's also under the guise of a love for comics. So Bad Weekend follows follows the story of a veteran comic book artist who returns to the convention scene after being away from years at a time, and it kind of follows the story of him trying to recapture these pages that have been lost on him. However, along the way, we as readers are kind of exposed to his horrible nature and the fact that he's kind of been ripping off fans all these years. He's been making fake artworks to sell to them. He's been, kind of a dick and taking their money and not giving them anything in return. And as a comic book fan myself that spends a lot of time in conventions, I felt like that was a very personal story to me. This story is actually a love letter to comics deep down underneath its crime story facade. And not only is it a love story to comics when you have this Jack Kirby-esque character, but it also pulls down the wool of what exactly goes on behind that curtain of comics. Comics aren't great and fantastic. There are some creeps that are in the comic book industry. There's some creeps at convention, and it kind of exposes that. I mean, we have scenes where you have guys that just kind of want to fondle these girls in scantily clad costumes. You have a scene that really hit me in particular where our comic book artist is coming face to face with a fan who claims that he's his biggest fan and just kind of bleeds his heart out to him and how much he loves and is passionate about this man's work. And yet the comic book artist really doesn't care. He's kind of just there because he has to be. He's kind of just there because of the money. And I think that this is just a really interesting book, especially if you are deep in the comic book industry like I am. If you're the type of person that kind of goes to conventions, you're going to be able to see all of the hidden secrets and hidden meanings of this book that are kind of disguised over this little crime story. So again, not a big fan of Ed Brubaker, although I do want to get my hands on that Pulp book because that looks like it could be a lot of fun. But Bad Weekend, if you're a comic book journalist, comic book Instagrammer, I don't care if you go to a convention once in a while, I definitely think you should read this book because I think that you would really, really appreciate it. So I did a comic book wrap-up video, I think it was for April, where I talked about how I'm not the biggest fan of Black Widow. However, I read the Black Widow, Mark Waid, and Chris Samnee run and absolutely fell in love with it. So of course, your girl's gonna go and just finish the run and finish the complete collection. And I can honestly say that this book from start to finish is a really excellent joy and just a wonderful read. So I won't go too much into it because if you want to know a little bit more on the details of the book, you can go and check out my April or May, I don't know which one it was, but you can go and check out what I had been reading comic book wrap out. But this book is really great, and I think it's a really wonderful Marvel book for new readers or readers that actually don't know a whole lot about the character, aside from maybe just the experience that you've had with Natasha in the MCU. Or maybe you haven't had experience with Natasha in the MCU. I think this book is really awesome because it's very similar to Moon Knight by Jeff Lemire, which is another Marvel book that I absolutely love and can't wait to talk about with you guys one day. But I think that this Black Widow run stands alone alongside that book because they are self-contained stories. These are two books, two very different books, mind you, but they're two books that you can pick up with not really having any experience on the character. However, if you were to read that complete collection, and Black Widow in particular only is about 12 issues long, you get a full, complete, and concise story. There's no big backstory that you need to know about. There's no what happened in the issue from 1989 that is very important to this particular issue in 2006 and now relevant in 2020. There's no worrying about that. And that's what I really like about a lot of these recent Marvel stories is that they feel very great for casual readers to just kind of jump in. Now, I will say, your girl's a little disappointed with this book. The reason why your girl's a little bit disappointed is because I was promised, okay, maybe I wasn't promised, but I made the assumption that because of some gorgeous covers that I'll throw here somewhere, I was promised some spicy Bucky Natasha stuff. And while Bucky Barnes did make an appearance, it was not as spicy as your girl would have liked. So I am still on the hunt for that spicy Winter Soldier, Black Widow content. So please, if you have anything, give me recommendations down below because my heart needs to be filled with spicy Bucky Nat. And I think this means I'm going to finally go and read the Winter Soldier collection because I have seen some panels. And if they are from that book, as I am led to believe, I'm going to be a very happy lady. Now, what's really funny is I actually read another Black Widow book. I don't have it because it's a library book, of course, and it's on its way back on to somebody else who wants to read it, but I'll throw it up somewhere on the screen. But I also read Web of Black Widow, which was a 5-issue miniseries that kind of took Natasha through all of her previous exes, because you know that girl has dated everybody in the Marvel Universe. We get to see Daredevil, we get to see Captain America, Iron Man, Hawkeye, and of course Bucky Barnes. But it felt very convoluted compared to the Black Widow collection by Chris Samnee and Mark Waid. It had to deal with Natasha dying and then coming back to life. I really didn't know what was happening. It kind of filled some of the gaps with Tales of Suspense and what was left there with the big Russian comrade bear. No, I did not stutter on that. I did say big Russian comrade bear. But it just wasn't a good book. It didn't feel complete to me. It was kind of lacking. It was kind of less than what I had expected or hoped for. You know, for a book that was going through the exes, basically, of Natasha Romanoff and going through all of the important people in her life, you know, it didn't really lend itself to some good character interactions. So I was kind of disappointed there. So I guess the moral of this story is, if you're looking for a Black Widow read the Black Widow Complete Collection, because that's a good book, and that's a really great book for new and old comic book fans just looking to get more into the character. Alright, so this next book is, it's a big one for me. And it's really funny because like I said, I filmed this video 3 times, and both times, and probably including now, I have cried on camera when talking about this book, which is really ironic because it is such a lighthearted and funny book, but it kind of hit a personal string with me. So please bear with me while I talk about the lovely manga known otherwise as The Man and His Cat. Now, The Man and His Cat is a book that I've been wanting to read for a long time. I mean, look at it. It just looks really, really cute with the cute cover and the man and his cat, and they're both adorable. And it's a really simple story. So it's a bunch of little vignette stories about an old man who goes into a pet store and he finds this really fat, chubby, cute cat, and he adopts him. And it's basically just a bunch of their stories about how much these, 2 people, cats, this owner and this cat, how much they kind of fall in love with each other, and how much, they kind of fill the space in each other's lives that were missing before. And this book it feels really personal to me because the little fat chubby cat that I love a whole lot, he reminds me a lot of my cat, Bubby, that I unfortunately lost last year. And Bubba was my whole world. And it's both heartwarming and very hard to read because I see this cat that kind of looks like my Bubba, but definitely has the same personality as my cat. And I kind of was able to put the connection between me and the old man and Bubba and this cute little chubby cat. And I cried. I literally cried the whole way through this book. And it's just because of that personal hit on that. But I don't want to deter you from reading this book because I think that you should. It is very cute. It is very funny. It's super duper wholesome. Like, I know I said that The Way of the House Husband might have been the most wholesome manga I've ever read. However, The Man and His Cat is definitely the most wholesome manga I've ever read. I think I read it like 3 times before I sent it back to the library. So yeah, I need you to read a story about a cute man and his cute cat. I've kind of been at ends with DC Comics lately. I mean, if you saw from my previous video ragging on DC and their lack of female representation, you've seen my Twitter and how angry I am with the whole massive DC layoffs, and just everything that they've been doing in general, and even before all of this stuff was going on, it felt like everything on the DC shelves kind of has just felt the same, and everything kind of looks the same to me. So for some reason, I decided to pick up from the library Titans by Judd Winick, and it's actually the Titans run that happened before the New 52, and I decided to reread it. Now, Titans has a special place in my heart just because it is one of the first comic books that I ever read. When I was collecting real early and I was doing all of my buying in dollar bins, I found the complete run of Titans and I read through it, and I remember falling in love with those characters. Not only did I fall in love with those characters, but it was honestly my first experience with a lot of them. So this book boasts a huge cast that might be familiar to you. It has a lot of the same characters from the Teen Titans television show. It has Beast Boy, Raven, Arsenal, Wally West the Flash, Donna Troy, Starfire, Nightwing, and Cyborg. I will say this. I don't think that this book has aged very well. And when I say that this book has not aged very well, I am talking specifically about Ed Benz's art that has somehow kept itself stuck in 2008 or 2010, whenever this book initially came out. It is not very good. It's very rough. And considering how much I love Judd Winnick, I don't exactly love this book as much as I used to. Now, granted, I will say that that first arc is really interesting to me. It has a heavy focus on Raven as her brothers come back, and it kind of ties them in with the 7 deadly sins, which I think is really smart and really unique, especially when we consider Raven and how she's the daughter of a demon, and then they link this whole 7 deadly sins aspect to it. So I really like that, and it really made me connect with Raven, considering I don't really care about her in general. She's another character that has just sort of never clicked with me. But then we kind of go into a muddled mess with Jericho, and I remember back in the day being really confused about that Jericho arc because I didn't really know who characters were. I only recognized, the ones that were in the Teen Titans show, obviously. However, despite 10 years later and having the massive amount of ridiculous, stupid DC comic knowledge that I have, I'm the type of person that refers to DC Comics characters by their first name, so that's how close my relationship is with DC Comics. But despite all that knowledge, I was still really, really confused. So I think if you're looking for a really good Raven arc, I think Titans, it's like the first 6 issues of the trade. I think it's a really good thing for you to pick up. However, like I said, I just don't think that it is a book that has aged very well. So my reading and the things that I've been reading have kind of changed over the past couple months. I find myself reading a lot more indie comics, and with indie comics, I find myself reading a lot more small publishers. So that being said, I decided to take a chance on The Love She Offered, which is from small indie publisher SourcePoint Press. Now, if you had checked out my previous video for my comic book wrap-up, I had read Dead End Kids, which is another title from SourcePoint Press, and I absolutely loved it despite having some small issues with it. And I can say that The Love She Offered is probably even better than Dead End Kids. So The Love She Offered is really, really interesting to me because it sports a very simple story and one that we don't see often in comics. So the story of Love She Offered is that of a grieving father after his daughter has been brutally murdered, and they believe that she has been murdered by her ex-boyfriend. So what does the dad do? Well, he takes some beers, he takes his brother, he takes his friend, he takes the ex-boyfriend, and they go to a little cabin in the woods, and he decides that he's going to torture a confession out of him to send him to jail. Now, like I said, this isn't really the type of story that I would expect from comics. If I'm being quite honest, I could see this story on like a Lifetime TV movie, I could see it in a television show, but in a comic, it's so simple that it doesn't seem like it would work. However, it does. And The Love She Offered, while it's a very small book, it only has about 3 issues in it, it's a intense read, and it's one that I literally just could not put down. I found myself turning each page and just constantly wanting more up until the very end, and without really saying anything, because I really do want you to read this book, The Love She Offered has one of the best and most interesting twist endings that I've ever seen in a book ever, and it's one of those endings where you don't think that it's something that could happen up until it's actually revealed, and then you're like, holy shit, what just happened? So The Love She Offered is a nice little simple read. It's something that I finished in, I think, in the span of a half hour, and it only has like a price point of $9.99. So if you're looking for just a really interesting take on the comic book medium and something different that hasn't been done in comics yet, I would definitely check out this book. So I like to think that this comic book wrap-up haul has done a really good job, or I've done a really good job. Pat yourself on the back there, Mars. But I like to think that this comic book haul is a really nice blend of both Cape Comics and indie comics, which leaves us off on the last book, and that is Jessica Jones' Blind Spot from Marvel Comics. Now, Jessica Jones' Blind Spot is one of those really weird digital first series that Marvel did where they were only featured on Comixology, and then Marvel decided that they wanted to go in for a cash grab and release them in single issues, and that kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
We've got to have money.
But Jessica Jones' Blind Spot is just a really, really great book, and is a really great book for people that want to get into the character. So the story is really simple. Jessica Jones finds herself in trouble yet again when she finds out that people around her are being murdered and coming back from the dead, and it's kind of this, psychological, mystery, as Jessica Jones stories are, as she tries to get to the bottom of things. Now, the reason why I say that this book is as good as it is because of its writer, Kelly Thompson. Now, Jessica Jones books we have seen in the past. However, it always feels like they've been done by Brian Michael Bendis and Alex Maleev. I absolutely hate that fact, because as somebody who didn't know who Jessica Jones was, and then watching her show on Netflix when it debuted and absolutely falling in love with her character, I immediately went and read the Alias books, and I freaking hated them. I absolutely hated the Alias books because I felt like they were boring. They were kind of bland. They really were more detective and less witty. And that's the one thing that I really like about Jessica Jones, is I like her witty nature, and I like her kind of badass attitude where she really doesn't care, what happens, as long as it, doesn't mess up her flow. And I feel like that's what was missing with all of those previous iterations of the character. However, Kelly Thompson, it honestly feels like the Jessica Jones that we're used to. It feels like the Jessica Jones that we've seen on screen, and it feels like Kristen Ritter's voice is behind these pages. And so if you're looking to get into Jessica Jones books but have kind of found yourself struggling, I highly recommend picking up this book. Now, this book is self-contained. However, it also does kind of lead itself off to a sequel, which is Jessica Jones, The Purple Daughter, and that's another book that I've read, and you can already tell where this one's kind of going with the Purple Man and the Purple Daughter. Not to mention, this book features Emma Frost. I think you should definitely read these books if you're the type of person that have just wanted to get into the character, but maybe you didn't know where to start, or maybe you did try to read Alias or the other Jessica Jones series by Brian Michael Bendis and just found yourself kind of bleh with it, because that's how I felt. Now, y'all didn't think that I was going to talk about Jessica Jones' Blind Spot and not talk about how I have been introduced to yet another comic book wife, because Jessica Jones' Blind Spot, at least for me, introduces the character otherwise known as Elsa Bloodstone. And let me tell you, when I say that this is a woman in comics that I think I'm in love with. And I feel like, is this going to become kind of a theme where every comic book wrap-up video is just me explaining that I have fallen in love with yet another woman from comics? Because last month it was Magic, this month it's Elsa Bloodstone. Who should be my next comic book wife? Tell me in the comments. Let's place bets on who I'm going to fall in love with next month. That is it! That is everything for this comic book wrap-up. I do want to thank you guys so much for kind of sticking in there with me. I've kind of gone through some hiccups in terms of recording and being comfortable with where I'm at right now as a comic book YouTuber and journalist. It's a weird process. It really is, especially when there's not a whole lot of people that kind of do this, and I feel like I'm taking a bunch of different pieces and kind of making it my own and Frankensteining this really weird thing. But you guys, I feel like I thank you guys every video, but I can't stress enough how awesome you guys are. And so before we end things, I do want to just kind of touch into some housekeeping things that I kind of feel really weird about. However, I kind of want to talk about my Patreon, because Patreon is a really weird thing for me. Patreon for me is very strange because I hate asking people for money. I hate it. However, I've been encouraged by people to set up the Patreon. I have some lovely Patreons already, or patrons, whatever you want to call them. However, I still kind of find myself stuck in what to offer, because I'm the type of person where, if you are going to be subscribing to a patron, I want to be giving you guys something. So I have been kind of brainstorming and kind of revamping all of that. There is going to be a patron exclusive podcast, otherwise known as That Comic Podcast, because you guys know that I am very, very creative when it comes to my naming of things. So there is going to be a patron exclusive podcast. I also have a new stretch goal where once I hit a certain amount, I'm going to open up a new tier, which is going to offer very cute, fun comic book themed postcards that I will be sending out with little handwritten letters. And these are postcards that I'm going to be designing myself. So there's that, and that is very exciting. But yeah, thank you as always for just thanks for sticking on this really weird, incredible, weird journey. I got the Dragon Ball Z shirt on, which is hinting at some future manga stuff as well. I've got some manga stuff in the works with my dear friend Lana, so we're going to be filming and shooting that stuff very, very soon. But, you guys are great. Y'all already know you're great. So I'm just going to scoot on out of here, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!